All right. Well, good morning. If you're new here this morning, my name is Doug Robinson. I'm one of the ministers on staff here at Sugar Grove. And like Blake mentioned, you and everyone else here this morning, we're in for a real treat, as we're not just going to watch pictures about a trip, but we're actually going to get a chance to talk to almost the whole team who was able to spend a week in Guatemala. We're in a series called On Purpose. We're going through the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And my hope has been that as we've been doing this, we've been talking about two different times and locations. Certainly talking about the events, the actual locations that are taking place and the things that we're reading in the Gospel of Luke and then as the church is established in the book of Acts. But that somehow what's happening there isn't just about back then, but it's also about the here and the now. It has something to do with what we're doing here in Houston or Guatemala or wherever we happen to find ourselves. And so, the series is on purpose, and a lot of times at Sugar Grove, we'll talk about that the gospel carries with it power and purpose. So we believe, hands down, that through the person and work of Jesus, on the Easter weekend, in his death and resurrection, God has changed everything. And he's done it because he loves you. He's done it for his glory. And it's really, really good news. There's power in what was accomplished on the cross and in the resurrection. There's freedom from sin and eternal life and reconciliation and new, it's amazing. And it's good news. And yet it doesn't just stop there. It carries with it a purpose that compels us and pushes us forward. We read about it with the disciples. We're reading about it with Peter and with Paul. And certainly that's true for us as well. So when we look at the book of Acts, we read this a couple of weeks ago, but here's a couple of just quick passages for you. In Acts chapter 13, we read about a guy named Paul, whose life has been radically transformed by the power of the gospel. King Jesus, who is raised from the dead, meets Paul and changes everything about him. And we read about a specific purpose that Paul gives him in Acts 13, or Jesus gives Paul in Acts 13. It says this, that Paul and his friends, they're worshiping the Lord and fasting, and the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." And then after they had fasted and prayed, the people around Paul and Barnabas, they lay hands on them, and then they send them off. And they go and they do what God's called them to do. And then eventually we get to the end of Acts 14, and we read that what's happened while they're gone has something to do with the people back home. That it's not disconnected, that they're actually going to be blessed by hearing about what was taking place. Here's Acts 14. They sailed back to Antioch, and after they arrived and gathered the church together, Paul and Barnabas, they report everything God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, and they spent a considerable time with the disciples. And so, man, that's good for them then, and it's good for us now as well. And so we want to celebrate, we want to hear, we want to be encouraged by what took place in Guatemala over the last week. And so what better way to do that than to hear the stories and talk to the team that went. So let's welcome the team who went, and if you're on the team, come on up. Yeah. I think I have enough chairs, but I'll be honest, I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No. Awkward. I got this one just for you, Sean. I don't know if I left enough room. I don't know. Yes? Yes. Awesome. All right, here's a mic for the front row, and then Carrie's got a mic for the back row. Oh, this is awkward. Okay, one more here. Yeah, cheer for Josie too. All right. All right, so for those of us who may not know you guys, why don't we just go down the row and tell us your name, and then, was this your first trip, your fifth trip? You just tell us that. We'll start there. Alicia.
My name is Alicia Howell, and I lost count. I'll have to check. I don't know.
I'm Darlene Willis, and it's my second trip.
Cassie Salinas Roney, my very first trip to Guatemala.
Lindsay McVeigh, 7th trip.
Nice.
Becky Kosarik, it was my first trip to Guatemala.
I have a mic, I'm good. Carrie Kilgore, first trip.
I'm Joey, and it was my second trip.
Craig, and not my first trip.
David Maury, and that was my first trip.
Nicole Oberle, second trip.
Josie Perez,
Not first trip.
Not first trip.
Sean McCoy, second trip.
Awesome. So maybe if we could get the perspective of a first timer and just kind of tell us a little bit about your perspective on the trip, and then from somebody who it was not their first trip, maybe your perspective on the trip. Just give us some generalities, kind of fill us in. Who wants to speak there? It's just, listen, it's going to be casting lots, and then wherever the mic ends, that's where the Spirit wanted it to be, and you just go, all right? You got it, Becky.
This was my first trip to Guatemala, and I have been wanting to go for some time, mainly because I see the hearts of the people who are going and how touched they feel when they get back. I really did. In some ways, it was as I expected. I expected to see things that made me more grateful for what I have. But what I did not expect to just to laugh all week that we were gone, to really feel relaxed and joy in settings that were really difficult at times. Our beds were not comfortable. You know, we were on buses that were uncomfortable. But you don't notice the discomfort because what you do is you feel loved. You feel like you're there for a purpose. And honestly, it was nice to set apart the time on purpose to look outside of yourself.
Yeah, that's great. Sean, you want to speak for the not first-timers?
Sure. So this trip I thought was particularly amazing for a couple of reasons. One was in my life, and have you ever done short-term plans of any kind or any type of endeavor, personally or professionally or whatnot, there's typically the way you plan it, there's the way that it goes, and there's the way that you wish it had gone. Like after a sermon, I'm sure you've been like, oh, I should have said this.
Every time.
Every time, right?
Every time.
If you've ever experienced that so many times, especially at the end, you're like, oh, I wish this had gone this way. And I would say that, what we intended to do in the very beginning, how it went, and then after it was over, that reflection on it, I really wouldn't have changed a single thing that we did.
That's awesome.
I think even some of the rougher spots really end up becoming opportunities to grow, opportunities to connect with each other, like Becky said. I mean, we laughed a lot. There was a lot of emotion. It was a very intense trip, probably one of the most intense trips I've ever been on. But it was just, we really did have a great time, and it wasn't like a cruise great time. It was just this humanity
Yeah.
we got to experience amongst ourselves. And then the beautiful part of it is it isn't just a helicopter thing where you come in and, we did some great things for them, and then we left. I mean, we were ingrained, with them, with many people that become friends like we are. Mm-hmm. And so you just feel like it's a continuation of what it's like here. You're just doing it down there, and your bed's a little bit more uncomfortable, and you get to wake up next to people like Carrie and friends that you have instead of just seeing them at church.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you guys keep mentioning laughter, and I asked them, like, hey, give me some questions that I should ask, and you guys have been mentioning laughter, and so I'm just going to read the question, because it's confusing to me, but maybe you could explain it. If Alicia yells volcano and starts running, what does that mean?
I either offended her.
Yeah. Alicia?
Okay, so as a born and raised Texan, I didn't get much in the way of earthquake training. So there was an earthquake while we were sitting in ruins, and I don't know. I'm not responsible for what I say in panic mode. But I moved very quickly, and all of these people just sat there. Anyway, they eventually moved, and no one was harmed. Thank goodness.
And but just so we're clear, because this is being recorded, I want this in the record.
So there was a 5.6 magnitude earthquake on the coast of Guatemala, and so we were in Antigua, just basically doing a tour of these ruins like a museum. So just imagine we were literally sitting around after it was all over, and we'd been there for a couple of 2-3 hours, and we're just basically at the end of it, kind of wrapping up, because everybody kind of spread out a little bit, and then all of a sudden she literally just starts running into the middle from the underneath. So there's an underneath area that's stone and overhang, and there's a courtyard in the middle of the fountain. And so she just literally takes off screaming and is yelling volcano. And so I was sitting there next to Carrie, and I'm just like, what? I don't know what this means. And then we found out there was actually an earthquake. And it was a rumble, so we actually felt the earthquake come through. And then there's some irony because not all of us got to feel the earthquake. And so some of us were. So we can talk about that.
Apparently I am immune to earthquakes.
You weren't aware.
No, I have no idea. I didn't feel the earthquake at all.
Interesting.
Like I kind of think it's a big ruse, just.
And I actually was standing on the ground. I was talking to Alicia's mom and herself. We were talking about Lubbock, and then I said something about, I said something like Lubbock is a college station but on steroids, and I thought, did I say something? When she ran, I didn't hear volcano. all I saw was running. I heard her scream in my ear, and then I looked behind. I'm thinking, what did I say to offend her? And I thought, no, oh gosh, I can't mention anything about Lubbock or steroids anymore.
Yeah.
So,
But
I don't know.
It sounds like you care for people, though, Alicia, because no one else was warning anybody. It was only you. So Alicia Howell, everybody, and her heart.
By the way, yesterday, if you weren't watching television, there was actually an earthquake near Amarillo, Texas.
There you go. I'm sure someone screamed volcano there, too. Okay, so on Saturday, you guys had maybe the biggest single event of the trip, where it involved widows and feet hand washing, nail polishing, serving lunch, a mosaic, water filters. Tell us about the day, your role, your experiences in all of that.
Actually, I'd like to say something. This is my first time in Guatemala. I actually did 5 trips to Honduras in my past. I've actually been away from church for about 4 years. I just came back. And we had been praying for a church to come to. And, of course, after I think our 9th or 10th month, Lisa asked, why did we keep paying for a church when I was sitting in one? So anyway, so we placed membership here. But the very first thing after I placed membership, I decided to go on this mission trip because I really needed to find out where my heart was at and what my purpose was. And I actually ended up participating in the hand washing, which was amazing. I felt like I was touching the hands of the hearts of each lady while I was washing their hands. Their hands are so rough and calloused because they work so hard. And to me, that was the biggest blessing out of the whole trip.
Wow.
So Saturday, I had listened to a podcast about a woman who had gone somewhere here in the States and had done some feet washing and just some spa type treatments with women, homeless women here in the States, and what an impact it had made on her. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe we could transfer something like that to a time that we're in Guatemala. And Max had said there's some widows here that could really use some encouragement. And so the idea was kind of born that those two things could happen. Those could work together. And I think we had in mind maybe 15 to 20 women. And Craig and Josie and Alicia talked to Max one day on the phone and kind of, from what I've heard, finishing the conversation, said, hey, by the way, about how many women are you talking about? And he said, 50. And I think you guys laughed and said, oh, I thought you said 50, but you said 15, right? And he said, no, 50 and probably more like 60. And it turned out there were 71. So I was trying to plan this out and how it could work, and it was an impossible task in my mind, and I'm a little bit dependent on control and order. And so panic kind of set in. But the idea was, let's wash these women's feet, let's wash their hands, let's paint their nails, let's just do something that makes them feel good. for the sake of letting them know that they're loved and they're seen, and having human contact with them. And they were widows of the average age was probably 65 or 70. It turned out that several were blind. We didn't know that. And about 10 to 15 minutes into it, the plan went out the window, which is kind of par for the course, like Sean was saying, is the way you envisioned it, the way it really went down, and how you wished it had. And I agree with you that it didn't go down like I thought at all, but I wouldn't change it at all. It was really beautiful. So I'd like for someone else to share their experience while doing that.
Yeah, so I can kind of give a guy's perspective to Saturday. And, you know, the whole time we were meeting, we were talking about this spa day and kind of where the men would fit in and, you know, what would be our responsibilities or our duties, our tasks. And so that was all kind of still up in the air until the night before. And Lisa asked, so I need some people to wash feet, and I need people to paint fingernails and wash hands. And I felt this just overwhelming anxiety come over me as I was trying to figure out where I would end up in all of this. So so we had some very humble people like Carrie and Chapito over here and Craig, who stepped up and did some foot washing. And so I found myself very uncomfortable with this, and you know, for many reasons, but that day I was thinking I was going to be in arts and crafts, and we had, I think, 2 of the translators in the hand washing station, so we wanted at least 1 translator at each station. So I believe it was Josie who got up and came over to the arts and crafts section, and so we were going to be short on the hand washing. So I could see Lindsay was a little stressed out, and so I volunteered in that moment just to kind of help her feel okay with how things were going to go. So I walked up to a table with water and oils and lotions and fingernail clippers, files, and I really wondered what I got myself into, because I don't think I've used any of these things in the past decade. So thank goodness for Cassie, because I was like literally just watching her and like, hey, what's this spray bottle thing? Like, it's like, that's lavender. It makes her hands really soft. I'm like, okay, let's use some lavender. Anyway, so the first woman gets up there, and I'm a little anxious because I'm thinking, you know, what is this elderly widow going to think about a man washing her hands, or, you know, that whole situation. So I was a little bit uncomfortable with how she was going to feel, but I realized that I was the one that was uncomfortable in this situation, and I started thinking about, you know, why we were here and what this trip was about, and I felt that this was an opportunity to show God's love to this woman, and this is exactly the moments and how God is able to use just a scared, you know, incapable sinner like myself to sit down in a very uncomfortable situation and simply just share a moment with an elderly woman who may have not had any contact with anybody in a very long time. So as I became more comfortable in that situation, I was able to really look at these women and just start thinking about their lives. And at first glance, you just see a elderly, kind of weathered, you know, just really tough life sitting in front of you, and it's hard to kind of see that as a person, right? So I started thinking that, you know, this is God's child, you know, and so I started thinking of this woman, you know, when she was a child and what her life was like, and as you massage her hands, you feel the calluses, and you start wondering, you know, what her life was like and what roads that she went down, and you know, it was just a true honor to get to just share God's love with these women in Guatemala, and you know, something that I was truly anxious and paranoid and scared to death of. Really taught me what God's love is. Wow. And being able to walk in the presence of God that day was very much a blessing.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So I see some of you guys have shirts with fingerprints on it, and I hear like that's kind of a wild story about how all that went down. Can somebody explain that? I'll keep talking as the mic passes. Hey, Sean, would you tell us about the shirts?
Yeah. Before I do, I want to add a couple of things to Saturday real quick that I feel. One's a very funny story, I think. So we went into this thing, and as our society sets it up, and as David mentioned, you got a bunch of guys, older women. We made it a point to not only, on our end, be cognitive of whether or not women would be comfortable with us being there. We actually told them why we were there. We said, hey, if you don't want a guy to rub your feet, we get that, no problem. And so we'll get a woman to come do that for you. And then we found out that what we had was the opposite problem. And there was a long line of women that wanted Craig to wash their feet. So if that gives you an idea of kind of, we're in there going, okay, we got to be sensitive, and we got to be ready for this, because they don't necessarily maybe want this to happen, and they did, and they wanted him. So if you need your feet rubbed, need a little oil, I don't know, maybe.
Find Craig. Go find Craig in the cafe after
it's
church today.
It's all good.
Perfect.
Yeah, he'll be in the cafe. And then the second story is I want to say one of the beautiful things about when somebody like David does what he does and he gets a chance to have that experience, what it also did was it freed up Josie to go and help the rest of us as we're running around trying to get you guys and gals to imagine. We have foot washing with all that, hand washing, nail painting. There was two arts and crafts tables, one to make that mosaic. And then we had all kinds of other things going on, and it's in this little confined space, 71 women plus all of us and everybody else. There's a lot going on, and communication is very, very important because I don't speak Spanish. I can say a bunch of stuff in Spanish, but I can't speak it. And so for us, and the irony is she's not going to say anything, even though that's what she does for us, along with Cassie and along with Vicky, who was there. But Josie has gone along so many times, and now that she's here, I want you guys to know that Josie doesn't just translate for us. She doesn't just, translating is kind of, I have an app on my phone that can translate. And I'm sure you've had people translate stuff for you. And you can translate the words, but you may not be able to interpret what they mean. You may not be able to take it from your heart and really convey the message that person's trying to get over here and then back to them. And we are so blessed in this group to have Josie do that. Yeah. And she did it all day, every day. And from something as simple as I'm looking for the bathroom to like the gospel, like the essence of the gospel and people preaching and being preached to. And so she won't say anything, but I just want to just take a moment to tell you that we love you.
Yeah.
And to thank her for that. But something as simple as David stepping out into that world that's not comfortable, of doing something he didn't really want to do, allowed her to free her up to go do and serve in other places. And that's kind of the essence of it. So that's what we got on this trip a little bit around. So yeah, I got a hilarious, funny situation with feet rubbing, and then you also have the other side of it too. Yeah. So I say that to tell you I forgot what you actually asked. I was so focused.
I've been here in this spot not knowing what I was supposed to say either, so it's
I'm looking out, there's a bright light.
Yeah, it's fine. The shirts and the fingerprints and the thing.
Yeah, that's why I had them. Okay. So when we first started this, one of the things that we did, we met once a week as a group, and WhatsApp, many of you guys and gals may know that app, and so there's a logo that I created for the group, and I was looking through Canva, and I just looked up Guatemala, and there's a thumbprint with the Guatemalan flag on it. And so that became our icon in our little group message. And so as we went back and forth and all these other things, that was the logo. Well, then the last night we were there, Max and his team made us these shirts, and he brought them out, and he held them up. And he talked about the Marcado de Cristo on here, which is the mark of the Christ, which is us putting our thumbprint and our handprint and our footprint on the people there. And so in my mind, I just kind of was freaking out a little bit in that, no, there's coincidence, and I understand how that works. But I didn't really take it as coincidence that we had kind of had this on our mind to make this impression and this thumbprint on Guatemala. And independently from us, they did too, and had this idea behind them to make these shirts with this thumbprint. So that's kind of That's
pretty cool.
Again, maybe it's coincidence. I like to think it's not, but I thought it was a pretty awesome little moment.
Yeah. For sure. So what part of the trip, what experience did you have in Guatemala that's going to affect or apply to Houston in your upcoming days and weeks? So what's something that you learned there that we can bring back here and begin to apply to our life here in Houston, or that you would encourage us to learn from while we're here?
I'll tell you, one of the, this is my first trip, and, when we were meeting before the trip, we were always talking about, why do you want to go on this trip? Just kind of making you think about it. And I never really had a good answer. I mean, my answer was always, well, I like what, you can tell people are uplifted when they get back. I kind of want to experience that. And I've never been on an international mission trip, and I want to do that. That's something I want to experience. But that always seemed kind of like shallow reasons. And we got there on Thursday. We had a church service Thursday night at Max's church. And it was awesome, and it was great worship. Luis, who's their worship leader, he was really good. They've got a nice band that's playing, and it's awesome. It's good worship, and it's all in Spanish, obviously. But a lot of the songs are the same songs that we sing in English. You can kind of know what they're singing, and then about halfway through, they do they stop and they do kind of the meet and greet, right? The same thing we do here to start the service, but it's like a meet and greet on steroids. I mean, you don't just turn to the person behind you. You don't just walk 5 feet away. You hug everybody, everybody. And so I had all these people coming up and hugging me, and they're all saying, Dios te bendiga, which is God bless you in Spanish. Dios te bendiga, Dios te bendiga, Dios. And after about 20 hugs, I started to get emotional because I was like, this is why I'm here.
Wow.
Just seeing the love of God in this church and just showing the love of Jesus to people you don't know, that's what it's all about. These people didn't know me. Yeah. They knew that I loved God. They knew that I was there, kind of representing this church. But they loved me. And these were not just little half hugs either. These are full-on embraces. Yeah. And it was really awesome. And so even though, I think what we do here at Sugar Grove is awesome. I think we have a really good thing going. But there's still something corporate about the way we do church here that I wish we could get rid of. I wish we could because they're just there to worship and to love on everybody.
Wow.
And I think that we're going that the right direction, but I think that there's still something we could bring here. And I want to try to, even if it's just me, I want to try to be that person that can, hug more people. Yeah. Say I love you to more people. Say God bless you, Dios te bendiga to more people. That's what I want to bring back.
That's awesome. Thank you. Someone else?
Yeah, I'd like to, just kind of second what Carrie's talking about. And, for me, going on this trip was a lot of things. It's kind of being newer to Sugar Grove and just an opportunity to get to know some people that I may not have gotten to know otherwise. And very thankful for that. But, it's in search for that true joy and peace in life. There's so many things that make us happy, and we have so much here in the States. It's almost a blessing and a curse because it really just takes our focus and time away from the things that mean so much. And so when you go to Guatemala and you're around people who don't have a whole lot, but they have community and they have that love and they have that passion, you really feel like you're part of their family. Yeah. One of the songs that we sang a lot there was The Greatest Command, and, the line that, those who do not love do not know God, for God is love. And, being a Christian, my whole life, you hear God is love, God is love. But man, did I really know what that meant? Do I really know what that means? Yeah. And, to see that love and to feel that love and to be a vessel of that love was the greatest thing I feel like I've ever experienced in my life, to know that God used me to love his children in Guatemala. It was very frustrating at times to see people, and you want to talk to them so bad, but you just can't speak Spanish. And to go along with what Carrie's saying is, I'll never take for granted just a kind smile and a hug ever again, because I feel like I've met some really true friends in Guatemala that I've never spoken a word to other than hola. Yeah. But that kind grin and hug meant so much. Yeah. And I could tell there were people there that just needed a kind smile and a hug. I know there was many times I needed just a kind smile and a hug. And that's something that I would like to bring back to Sugar Grove and to the States, is just God's love is everywhere. And when we truly walk in his presence is when we see that and when we feel that and when we can share in his love with other people. So We find grace everywhere, in a hug, in a smile, through a friend, through a church, and it's just a beautiful thing.
It's awesome. It's good. Any other kind of parting stories or words of encouragement for somebody who's maybe not been but thinking about going on the next trip? Because there will be next trips after this one. Darlene Willis.
You didn't have to call me.
I know.
You know, this is the first trip I went on was with youth, and this trip was with adults, and it was a big difference. But one of the things that impressed me on this trip, or really I feel like God stressed to me, was that he definitely does. You know, we talk about the barriers that we have here within churches and here in the U.S. and stuff, and just in general. But the barriers there, God definitely, I saw him at work removing those barriers. The language was the biggest barrier for many of us on this trip. But God removed that, and it made me think, if God can remove this barrier that I perceive as unsurmountable, that he can remove all barriers. So for me, that's what I got from this trip, and I would encourage anyone that to go and just check this out, because I'm telling you guys, the people there, Max and his family, they are all about the kingdom, and they're living it day in and day out. And so that's what I want for my life, that kind of passion.
That's awesome. Thanks, Darlene. Yeah. And we'll wrap it up.
So I want to double down on what she said just a tad and give everybody an example of, you're going to hear, if you've heard about Guatemala, you've heard about Max and his family and his church down there, which we're talking about. And so I'm going to give you a perspective on where his heart is and what he's doing. Every night we would do a devotional. It was late, and a lot of the times we were tired and thought about not doing it, but it's a chance to recap the day and kind of go through what you saw. And not only would the team get around each other, but Max's family, the ladies that were in the kitchen, other people just would come in to be a part of this. So you're talking a large group of people talking about what they saw. The last night we were there were two young gentlemen that were there that we had not seen before. And Max pointed them out, and one of the guys even spoke. And it turns out that they were both not Christians. They were both day laborers who were there visiting from another part of Guatemala, if I remember correctly, and were there on a construction project. And Max had run into them and basically had asked them to just come be a part of this night's devotional. And why I think that's important and why it gives you a perspective, or it should, is that if you have a bunch of people like us come down and you're Max, and if you're being strategic and you're trying to think, what can I do to best represent myself and let the world know what's going on, you may go get the mayor, the assistant mayor, or somebody with some resources to help them show what they're doing, to impress, look who these people I have coming to do something, right? I would think that way, at least, in some level. You could go get somebody a little bit bigger fish in the pond, so to speak. Instead, he got two guys who really have nothing to offer in a material sense. But because he cared about where their heart was, and he knew where his heart was, and where he wanted their journey to go, ultimately, and what he wanted to get them to understand was that they were loved. And who knows if they'll ever come back to Chalatenango, they'll ever come back to that church, or what that will mean to them. But that, for me, was one of those moments where I was like, all right, Max gets what's going on. At least for I'm not trying to be like that, but that made sense to me. That resonated with me on another level outside of being advantageous, outside of showing off a bunch of people from America. He wanted these two guys. And one of the guys even spoke about it. He spoke about how he couldn't deny that. And that's one of the things, as far as taking back here, when you love people like they're talking about, that's one of the things we heard a lot from the people that were there. They'd never seen anybody wash somebody's feet before. And we didn't invent that, right? It was a beautiful idea that Lindsay came up with, but that was set for us a long time ago in terms of service, in terms of how we treat people. That matters. And it's undeniable no matter what your language is, no matter who you are, where you are socioeconomically or not. But as Carrie mentioned, other people, when you love on somebody, you just can't deny that. And it's overwhelming, and it's an amazing, it's life-changing. And it is what is the essence of the gospel. So that's what's going on there. That's what we do here. So it very much is the same heart there is the same heart we have here, ultimately.
That's awesome. Hey, would y'all thank the team for sharing with us this morning? Thank you, guys. And all these really cool pictures that have been scrolling, and they're on our Facebook page. That's taken by we got several photographers here that are just uber talented, and Nicole Oberly, while she was on the trip, she took all those. So thank you, Nicole. Thanks, because I will eat it during the communion thought, which would be awkward. And then, hey, if you're like, okay, I'm interested in that trip. No, you don't have to sign on the dotted line, but if you're interested in the trip, find me or Cliff. Would you raise your hand? That's Cliff, everybody. He loves when you all look at him. So if you could just focus all your attention on Cliff. Cliff is kind of leads our worldwide missions team. And so if you're interested, talk to one of us, and we'll write your name down. We'll get your contact information, and we'll keep you informed when the next trip is coming. So it's kind of perfect for us as we enter into a time of communion together, that the thing we wrap up the conversation on is this idea of service and this idea of foot washing, this idea of humbling yourself. And there's no better picture, there's no greater act of service than what Christ accomplishes on the cross. And it's important for us to remember that, like, again, whether it's Paul in Acts 13 and 14, or our friends this morning who are sharing with us, the thing that compels them, the thing that moves them, the thing that sends them out is Christ's actions on that Easter weekend service, or that weekend of events. It's the cross that compels them. It's the cross that pushes them. It's his sacrifice, his death on the cross that sends us to Guatemala or to cities in the ancient world or into Meadows or Richmond or Rosenberg or Houston or wherever you head this week. And so as we think about communion and we kind of wrap up with this idea of foot washing, I want to read to you a quote by a guy I quote a lot named N.T. Wright. And he's going to talk about how this cross, what Christ has accomplished, is this thing that invites us in to partner with God and bring about his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So this is what he says. The cross is the moment when the story of Israel reaches its climax, the moment when the people of God are renewed so as to be at least a royal priesthood who will take over the world, not with the love of power, but with the power of love. The moment when the kingdom of God overcomes the kingdoms of the world. It's the moment when a great old door, locked and barred since our first disobedience, swings open suddenly to reveal not just the garden, open once more to our delight, but the coming city, the garden city that God had always planned and is now inviting us to go through the door and build with him. Do you hear the invitation? It's in the cross that the door is open and we are invited to go build with him. The dark power that stood in the way of this kingdom vision has been defeated, overthrown, and rendered null and void. Its legions will still make a lot of noise and cause a lot of grief, but the ultimate victory is now assured. So as we go to the table this morning and we take communion together, my prayer is that we would hear the invitation of the cross, to not let the testimonies this morning be a great story back then, to not let the testimonies of Paul and what he shared with his friends that night be testimonies about back then, but that we might look forward and see that the cross is inviting us in to build with God himself and to partner with him and participate in what he's up to in this world. Jesus, as he's with his disciples, he says this. He takes bread, he gives thanks, he breaks it, he gave it to them, and he said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he also took the cup after supper and said, "The cup, this is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you."